Hey Hope City, it's Phil here. Today we're going to continue with week 2 of our series, Knowing and Loving Ourselves. But before we dive in, I just want to say something about not doing this alone. As you heard last week, I encourage you to let Jesus be your guide in this journey of looking within. One of the best ways that we can actually have Jesus walk with us is through the work and the companionship of a Christian counselor or psychologist. I know that my life and my relationships have really benefited through counseling. And if you're looking for a counselor and don't know where to begin, let's talk. I'm here to help. So give me a call or send me a message. And I say all of this because as a pastor, I know that I'm only scratching the surface of these topics. I'm merely starting a conversation and then hopefully bringing awareness to what God wants to do in our lives. It's my hope that you would go deeper and experience growth and healing. And I know that this takes place not just in your personal reflection and your time with God, but also through, your microchurch, with your friends and with your family. And yes, as I said, sometimes through counseling as well. All right, so this week we're talking about family of origin. We're going to look at how our families have shaped us. And I just want to unpack the life of Joseph very briefly to allow that to guide us. And so we're going to have a look at Joseph from the book of Genesis. So where do we begin? There's so many chapters to cover when it comes to Joseph. There's so much that we can say. But I propose that if you really want to know Joseph and you want to get to know his story, you really start with the names that he gives his two sons. Because names are carefully and thoughtfully chosen. The names that we pick for our children reflect our deepest beliefs, our highest hopes. They reflect our values. You see, in Joseph's case, I think the names that he actually chose for his two sons tell the story of his life. Have a look with me to Genesis 41. We're looking at verses 51 and 52. This is how it reads. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." The second son he named Ephraim and said, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." So based on how he names his sons, what do we know about Joseph so far? So far we know he has two sons. The first son he names Manasseh. Here's what we need to know. Manasseh is not an Egyptian name, although at this point he has been serving as the second in command in all of Egypt. He has an Egyptian wife. He is familiar with the Egyptian language, but Manasseh is not an Egyptian name. Manasseh actually sounds very much like the Hebrew word for forget. And we hear, the reason for this name. It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. And which really begs the question, what kind of trouble did this man Joseph experience that God would have to help him forget? It also begs the question, what kind of family did he have that God would have to help him forget them? We're talking about a type of, perhaps divine amnesia. You see, Joseph's backstory is a story of pain. He says, all my trouble. And a story of the people who caused that pain, all my father's household. You see, Joseph's family, if we read it through Genesis, we find out it was anything but whole, anything but harmonious, anything but peaceful. In fact, his family, you could say, was very much broken. It was fractured. It was dysfunctional. What was even worse for him is that all of that brokenness, all of that dysfunction in the family would focus on him, and it would result in some terrible things that happened to him. You see, Joseph's father, Jacob, had two wives, Leah and Rachel. They were actually sisters. And you could already see how this could probably, this could be a problem. You could see how the seeds of rivalry are already planted here, right in the foundations of this family. But the Bible tells us not only that, but Jacob loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. Jacob was actually forced by his father-in-law to marry her. And though Jacob loved Rachel, Rachel could have no children. But Leah had children. In fact, Leah had 6 sons and 1 daughter. And this caused Rachel, when she saw that Leah had children but she could not, this caused her to give Jacob her maidservant as a surrogate to produce children through her. And then Jacob, through this maidservant, Bilhah, had 2 sons. I guess for Rachel. That's how they were, keeping track at that point. Leah, seeing this, decided to get in on this as well. Didn't want her sister to even come close to her. She gave her maidservant, Zilpah, to Jacob. And then Zilpah had 2 sons for Leah, for Jacob. And if you're keeping count at this point, we're talking about 10 sons and 1 daughter total, though none are actually born to Rachel. Until one day, at the end of this long and bitter battle, Joseph was actually born to Rachel. And so here we have this family where there's so much rivalry, there's so much competition. And what does Jacob do? He treats all his sons and his daughters equally, right? Sadly, no. If you read Genesis 37:3, we're going to have a look at what happens. It says, "Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him." And you can just imagine, how did the brothers respond? Well, the Bible is actually very clear. So this is verse 4 of chapter 37 of Genesis. "When the brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him." And if things actually couldn't get worse between the relationship between Joseph and his brothers, Joseph later on had these dreams. And this is the same chapter, but this continues on, verses 5 to 8. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." All of this pain, all of this jealousy, all of this rejection, all of this favoritism, all of this hate, generations of it actually combine, and it results in catastrophe for Joseph. I don't have time to read the rest of chapter 37 of Genesis, but a long story short, his brothers decide to kill him, but at the last minute, an opportunity arises for them, not so much to spare his life, but to gain something out of it. So they decide to sell him as a slave, and so they sell their own brother into slavery at the age of 17. In that moment, we see brothers become bullies, or perhaps worse, because they went far beyond bullying. This was callous, this was murderous. They were cold-blooded. They literally negotiated a price for their brother. So when Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household," this is what he's trying to forget. This is his family of origin. And by naming his son Manasseh, he's not saying that God has given him amnesia from his trouble and his family. No, because every time he sees his son and every time he calls his name, he remembers. No, I think what he's saying is that somehow God has helped him process and accept his past, process the trauma, process the abuse, so much so that he can remember all that has happened to him in a new light. Perhaps by naming Manasseh, he is acknowledging the process, the journey he's been on. And maybe even acknowledging that he is still in process. That when he sees the joy of his the joy of his son, he still feels the bitterness of his own family. It acknowledges the pain of the past, but now it's rooted in hope for the future, hope for his son. Joseph has a second son, and he names him Ephraim. Again, this is not an Egyptian name. Ephraim sounds very much like the Hebrew word for twice fruitful. You know, you and I, we're not agricultural, so this fails to have the impact that it would for an agricultural society. But being twice fruitful is like your boss walking up to you and saying, "Would you like a pay raise this year?" And you're thinking, "Wow, okay, 5, 10%, 15%, like that would be amazing." But he raises your salary double, okay? Like that would be something to celebrate. This is what we're talking about. This is twice fruitful, double the harvest, double the pay, double the return on your investment. Can you imagine this? And then the reason behind his name, this is what Joseph said. He says, "It is because God has made me fruitful," not just ordinarily fruitful, but exponentially fruitful in the land of my suffering. Again, the brief backstory after he has been sold to Egypt. Again, Joseph was sold into slavery when he was 17. And as a slave, his master's wife accuses him of rape. He is innocent of this, but he's still thrown into prison, and he languishes in prison until he is 30. And then through a series of God-ordained events, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams of 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. And Pharaoh decides to put Joseph in charge of Egypt. He is second in command of all of Egypt. The only one above him is Pharaoh. He goes from slave who is languishing in the prisons until he is 30 to the second in command of Egypt. This is completely amazing. And I think Joseph's journey is also pointing out to us that for those of us who are moving from forgetting the past, we are on a journey that we may be thriving, that we may be fruitful in the present and in the future. And I think this is why we actually look at our family of origin. It's not so that we can hate our families, but so that we can ask God to help us make peace with what has happened to us so that we can experience God's healing and then learn how to love others well. It's hard to do so when we're carrying so much baggage. Long story short, Joseph ends up not forgetting about his brothers, but he ends up forgiving them and then saving his whole family from the famine. So while Manasseh means to forget, the good news we find here in the scriptures is that God actually helps Joseph forgive. So how do we examine our family of origin? Well, according to Rich Villodas in The Deeply Formed Life, we have been shaped by our families in three general ways. Okay, the first being we're shaped by the patterns in our family. We're also shaped by the trauma in our family. And we're also shaped by the scripts, the messages that we've received from our family. And I think we need to look at our families through these three lenses. All right? So this is how he describes it. The patterns are the repeated behaviors, the practices, and the habits or ways of thinking that extend from one generation to the next. For example, for Joseph's father, right, Jacob, he played favorites. He had 2 wives, but he had a favorite wife. And then of all the, 11 siblings at that point, 12 siblings at that point, he has a favorite son. One generation earlier, when Isaac and Rebekah had twins, the twins being Esau and Jacob, they each had their favorite son. Isaac chose Esau, and Rebekah chose Jacob. So we can see how there's stuff that happens from one generation, and it doesn't necessarily, manifest itself the same way in the next generation, but some iteration of it, some form of it does trickle through. We see these patterns. And Rich Villodas, he says it like this. He says, the battles we all face are not new. They have often been the battles of our parents, our grandparents, or our great-grandparents. You see, we inherit positive legacies as well as negative ones from our families. There's positive legacies, like maybe a love for sports and the outdoors, or maybe a passion for learning and music and the arts, or maybe like a healthy approach towards stewardship and money management. We can inherit all of this through our families, these positive legacies. But there's negative legacies as well, like legacies like workaholism, or legacies like conflict avoidance, or legacies that have to do with addiction, or maybe even relational brokenness, the inability to stay in a committed relationship. And patterns get repeated unless we become aware of them and begin to actually address them. You see, there are patterns in our families of origin. Okay? Next up, we're going to talk about trauma. Rich Villodas defines trauma as two sides of the same coin. One side being, I'm getting what I didn't deserve, what I don't deserve. And the second being, I'm not getting what I deserve. All right? So in terms of trauma being seen as what I don't deserve, we're talking about abuse, whether it's physical, sexual, or emotional. Or we're talking about painful periods of loss, where these painful, psychologically scarring moments, they happen to us, and we spend a lifetime working through them. I think we can safely say that Joseph's experience of being ambushed and then thrown into a well and then sold by his brothers into slavery constitutes an extreme case of trauma. In the second case, trauma is described as maybe nothing happening when something good might or should have happened, right? Here we're talking about never receiving the nurture or the warmth or the affirmation that we needed in order to thrive. Even though our parents were around or our caregivers were around, they never abused us, but they neglected us of certain things. Nurture, warmth, affirmation, things that would have helped us thrive. You see, as I read about trauma, as I see the patterns that are described as well, I realize that each family, no matter how wonderful our families are, each family has gaps. There's no perfect family. I'm trying my best, whether it's through counseling or working through my personal issues, to love and to parent my kids as well as I can, as much as I can, love them as much as I can. But I'm going to be honest with you, I am broken. I am in need of healing. It's like sort of half broken, half healed, trying to parent and trying to love. And so I know that my children, need God's healing and His work in their lives as well. Every family has gaps. But what we're trying to do here is, as we look at our families of origin, I want us to take an honest look at the patterns, and I want us to take honest look at the trauma and in the scripts and in the messaging as well, so that we can be honest with who we are, where we've come from, what we've experienced, so that we can create space for the Holy Spirit to bring about healing. It is through this self-awareness that we can begin to ask for God to come into our lives and heal us from trauma, deal with the scripts, and break some of the patterns. We need the Holy Spirit to begin His work of healing and restoration. Okay? That's the lens of trauma. I'm going to talk a little bit about scripts here. It's the last lens. According to Rich Villodas, scripts are the messages we receive, the roles we are given, and the ways we believe we must live that have been consciously handed to us or subconsciously interpreted by us. These scripts or these messages can result from one big moment in our lives, or it could be as the result of an accumulation of much smaller moments. But when we look at our family of origin, and we do this so that we can name some of the scripts, name some of the messages about ourselves and about our role, about who we are, that we've accepted, that we've lived out, so that we can begin to receive instead the scripts from the gospel, what God says about us, what God calls us to, how we're actually called to live. One way to identify a script in your life is by simply completing this sentence. Okay? How would you complete the sentence? It goes, I have to, and then you complete the sentence, right? I have to do well in school. I have to take care of those around me. I have to make sure that I don't cause trouble at home. You know, for me, growing up, my family, we lived with my grandparents, and I love them. But my grandpa in particular was a pretty volatile individual. So I lived with this high baseline of conflict, of anxiety. I mean, we kind of walked on eggshells growing up. So the script that I ended up living out was this: I have to keep the peace. I have to keep my feelings to myself. I have to suppress my anger and my frustration and not add fuel to the fire. I have to keep the peace. You see, but when I got married, I carried this script into my marriage, into my marriage with Grace, into my new family. And I thought I was keeping the peace just by stuffing the negative feelings, by suppressing them, by not communicating them. And so what do you think happened? After stuffing things over and over, one day I would just explode. And this process would happen over and over again. And what scared me was that one day I realized I'm becoming like Grandpa. My anger is something that scares me. My volatility is scaring me. You know, and so as I sought counseling, I finally learned to communicate my feelings on a regular basis when I feel them. I learned that my feelings are actually valid. But I also had to learn this new script. Not only that my feelings are valid, but that when it comes to peace, Jesus is the Prince of Peace. It's not up to me to hold all things together. And that what I really need is Him in order to make peace with those that I live with, even if it involves engaging in conflict with them, that I can engage in constructive conflict. And believe me, I'm still working at this. So what are the scripts? What are the messages that have been communicated to you, whether directly or indirectly, from your family of origin? And how have you carried them? How have you allowed them to kind of shape the way that you relate with others or handle conflict or the way you see yourself? My hope is that as a church, we would look at our families and as we examine, we would learn to love our families more as God helps us see our family members and the experiences in a new light. That when Joseph says, God has helped me forget all my troubles and all my father's family, I don't think he's talking about amnesia. I think he's talking about how God has helped him see all of what he's experienced in a different way. How he's allowed him to be free from the negativity and the baggage of those experiences. And so here's the prayer that I would love for us to pray into as we look at our families of origin. The first prayer is this: Lord, would you give me a deep awareness for how my family has shaped me? Right? And we're talking about the blessings that we want to celebrate, that God's going to bring to mind. We're also talking about the difficulties, the hardship, the stuff that we still carry around. We're asking Him for awareness. Lord, give me a deep awareness for how my family has shaped me. The second prayer is this: Lord, may you heal me of the patterns, would you heal me of the trauma, and would you heal me of the scripts, the messages that I've taken in, so that I can learn to love others well. All right? I have a couple questions for us to wrestle with and to discuss in our microchurches. 3 questions. First one goes like this: what are 1 or 2 positive legacies you have received from your family of origin that you celebrate? What are 1 or 2 negative legacies that you must continue to work through? All right, I guess that's the first set of questions. Second question is this: what are 1 or 2 scripts or messages you've received from your family of origin? Complete the sentence. From my family, I learned that I have to, and then you complete that last part. Third question. What does being twice fruitful look like for you as you reflect on your family of origin and your need for God's healing and restoration? All right, Hope City, this is a tough one. This is a deep one. I'm praying for you, and have been praying for you ever since I started putting this together. My prayer is that God's going to surface stuff that He wants us not just to work on our own, but that He wants us to bring before Him, and that we would really experience Him in healing us in some deep and meaningful ways, that we may be more free to not only know and love ourselves, but to know and love others, and love our families, our family of origin, more deeply as well. Thanks, Hope City.